Alright, this is lesson 116, Algebra 1, quotient rule for square roots. So, first of all, let's talk about some rules here as far as radicals are concerned and fractions. When we have a fraction that looks like this, we can rewrite that as the square root of 3 over the square root of 2. And a lot of times that will help us, especially if we have a problem that looks like this. Then I can write it as the square root of 3 over the square root of 16, which equals the square root of 3 over 4. And that is prettier than that is. Okay, so one of the rules when it comes to radicals is your final answer cannot have a radical in the denominator. So if you get an answer like the square root of 3 over 2, because that equals the square root of 3 over the square root of 2, there's a radical in the denominator. That is not allowed. So we have to learn how to get rid of the radical in the denominator. And there is a fairly simple way to do that. So we've got that right there, and we need to get rid of that radical. We look at what that radical is in the denominator, and we multiply the top and the bottom by that radical. Why can we do that? What is any number over itself? Any number over itself is 1. So actually we're multiplying this thing by 1. So we're not changing the value. We're just changing what it looks like. Okay, so let's do that. Square root of 3 times the square root of 2 is the square root of 6. Because they're both radicals, you can multiply them. Square root of 2, square root of 2. And you'll always be able to take the square root of that denominator. In this case, it's 2. And that would be your answer. Okay, if we had the square root of 5 over 3, that equals the square root of 5 over the square root of 3. We have a radical in the denominator, so we're going to multiply the top and bottom by that radical. And we get the square root of 15 over the square root of 9. Square root of 9 is 3, and that looks a lot better. And we're done with that. Alright, so let's go ahead and, that was the first two examples right there. Let's look at a third example, and we will be done with this lesson. End of the school year, the lessons get a lot quicker to go through. Okay, so notice my radical is the square root of 5, so I multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 5. Okay, so how do I multiply the square root of 5 times that? Well, it's going to look like this. And then over 5 times 5 is the square root of 25. And the square root of 25 is actually 5, so let's just put a 5 there. Okay, so let's distribute that. Okay, that looks pretty good, except we need to see if maybe that can be reduced. So let's go ahead and write it here. Square root of 75. Now, one of the ways I said to try to find out if you can reduce something is to see if two numbers multiplied together give you 75, and see if we can take the square root of one of those numbers. Now, 15 times 5 is 75, but I can't take the square root of either one of those, so those don't work. But 25 times 3, let me just make that like that. 25 times 3 is 75. What is the square root of 25? Let's just rewrite this. Square root of 25 is 5, left with 3, can't take the square root of that, and that goes down like that. Now, one of the important things is I cannot cancel those. And the reason I can't cancel them is because of this plus sign. If this were a multiplication sign, I could cancel. Whenever you have a plus or a minus sign here, you can't cancel this with this or this with this. Okay? Only when there's a multiplication sign. So even though it's tempting to cancel those, you can't. That ends up being your answer right there. And that is it for lesson 116. Let's see if there's anything. Let's do number 9 in the homework, just because sometimes this can be a little tricky, and I'd rather do one more with you. I've got a radical down there, so I'm going to multiply the top and bottom. Okay, so when you multiply these two, basically what happens is a radical sign just comes off, right? Square root of 5 times square root of 5 is square root of 25. Square root of 25 is 5, so we'll just put a 5 there. And now we're going to multiply those, so that's going to look like this. Okay, so this times this, this times this. Remember, when you've got radicals, the radicals multiply by each other, but that 2 doesn't have a radical to multiply by, so it just stays there. And then we're going to look and see if we can reduce. We can reduce that to 25 times 2, right? So 4 square root of 5 plus 2, what's square root of 25? 5. So we can pull that out. Equals 4 square root of 5 plus 10 square root of 2 over 5. And that ends up being your final answer. Okay, so that's it for lesson 116.